there are well over 1 billion websites. There's, as long as new things in the world are created, there'll be new websites. They are very low overhead. I mostly talk about like niche content websites. So it's like there's not a lot of like you don't need a massive amount of experience or operational expertise to make them happen. And just the return on the ROI is just nutty still. The standard multiple is like a 3 to 5 year, net revenue multiple. So that means like even at a 5 year, that's $20, 20% cash on cash return unlevered, which is like really good. Like, and I tell people this all the time, like it's not fully passive. It is a little bit, you have to manage it a bit. But like if you want fully passive income, go invest in AT&T stock and get a 6% dividend yield, and that's the best you're going to get. And if they've done it for 50 years straight, right? Or the S&P will give you 1.2% dividend yield, right? And what's exciting about the website flipping stuff is that's before you make any improvements, right? So it's not very difficult to find opportunities where I can find something that is to make 20% cash on cash immediately, and with some small improvements, make it 30% cash on cash immediately. And so I think people are really intrigued by that.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the life stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TRUFAN. And before we get into today's conversation with James Camp, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to leave us a positive rating and review. Share this episode with a friend and subscribe to the show. Put up brand new interviews every single Monday, and a brand new takeaways episode is an audio exclusive where I sit down and break down the most recent podcast episode of the week every single Thursday. And now, without further ado, I'm very excited to present to you my conversation with James Camp. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the life stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TRUFAN. Today on the podcast, we are joined by James Camp. James is a self-described serial entrepreneur, internet marketing kid, and is the co-founder of Common Commerce, an e-commerce holding company acquiring unsexy CPG brands. He's also the founder of Nano, a newsletter teaching you how to profitably buy and sell websites. And he's also a former Google mentor. On top of all of that, James has had 2 exits and thousands of failures. And I'm very excited to have him on the podcast today to talk about those exits, but also talk about those failures and well and learn from the lessons that he's learned. James, welcome to the show.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jacob. Thank you for having me, Ben.
I'm excited to have you here. And where I like to start on every podcast, I like to go all the way back to the beginning. So talk to me about growing up. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you grew up as a kid in New York City, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So talk to me, like, what was life like? I saw you tweeted recently, I think it was just the other day, where you tweeted how fortunate you were to have grown up in New York. So kind of talk about how that benefited you as a kid.
Sure. So, I think that, I grew up in New York City. My father lived in Brooklyn. My mom lived in Manhattan. And so I went to a bunch of schools. I got in a lot of trouble. Some of them were like pretty prestigious private schools. And then some of them were fantastic public schools. And some of them were pretty shitty public schools. And some of them were pretty shitty private schools. So my point is, I got to see the whole gamut. And I think there's 2 things that I found really valuable. And obviously having access to, even though I'd say that I particularly was pretty middle class or by New York City standards, I'm sure on some global standard, it's obscenely wealthy, but by New York City standards, for sure, middle class. I definitely had access and grew up with a lot of friends who were, I think, from, elite groups and were sort of on paths automatically, whether they worked hard or not, to be, successful. Now, conversely, and I think just as beneficial, was also growing up in, with friends who had no money at all and who came from nothing at all, right? And so it really takes a serious metropolis like New York City, I think, to be in a scenario where you can have the projects like on the same block as like a Michelin star restaurant, right? And just because it's so condensed. And so I would never give up those 2 things: A, the amazing network, and B, sort of that duality of life and sort of seeing, what I call la mezcla in Spanish, right? Like the mix of it all, of everyone. So yeah, so I think that was like a pretty powerful thing that you wouldn't get in a small suburb, for example.
Yeah. And so you mentioned how you went to a bunch of different schools. I think it was like 5 different high schools. What did you want to be growing up? Like, I know you're an internet marketing kid, but like at what point did that start? Like, what did you, like when you were 5, 6, 7, what did you think you were going to be when you were an adult?
So I was 5, 6, 7. I thought I was going to be a stockbroker or a lawyer. I was like positive of it. There's this board game called Life. And you could like, collect stocks in it. I remember in first grade bringing these little piece of paper that said like stock on it to my teacher and saying, "Oh," and I'm sure it wasn't like as eloquent as I put it today, but saying something like, "Oh, I have to talk to my stockbroker after school," something along these lines. I had no. I ended up working a little bit in equities markets a bit, like at a later point, but I had no clue what that really meant at the time. I just knew that I think that felt prestigious, and I think like I said, I was pretty middle class, so I think that I saw, um, you know, stockbrokers and lawyers as like sort of the classic sort of, upward mobility function of the middle class to the upper class, right? I mean, without even recognizing it at the time, that's sort of a classic sort of upward mobility function is professional services essentially.
Okay. And so when did you really kind of get on the internet in like in a marketing and a business context?
Sure. I was like in probably late middle school, early high school. The stockbroker lawyer stuff was a function of money. I really wanted to make money, and we could go in hours about how money isn't everything and how like it's such a crappy way to keep score. But I've been broke and I've been not broke, and I'll choose not broke any day of the week. Um, but I was like 15. I had been sort of messing around on the internet. I was just like very serendipitous timing. There's actually a Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers, that talks about this a lot. Sort of like, even though I think I worked really hard, and even though like I think I'm like decently smart, it was really interesting, perfect timing for the advent of the internet. I'm 33. So I grew up with AOL CD-ROMs, right? And floppy disks. So when I was first getting into the internet when I was like 15, it was still really the wild, wild west. And so I'd started like a blog that I was writing about like sneakers and random stuff. It was called Gold Piece XL. I'll never forget this. It was literally called goldpiecexl.com. And I wrote a couple articles. I think I had at one point actually bought like a casino affiliate site on eBay when I was like 14 or 13. I was like really trying to make money online. I just thought as like the lowest barrier because no one knew I was a child, candidly, right? And so I started this blog and I wrote a couple articles and I was in just some blogging communities and I would go and basically spam people. I didn't realize I was spamming, but I would just go DM hundreds of people until I hit these limits on these blogging communities and say like, "Hey, loved your content recently, would love you to check out my content." And a couple of these articles went viral on, I guess, these platforms that don't really exist anymore, like Stumble Upon and Dig, which were like really big back in the day. And I had like a little ad block on the side of the website and I made like $32 or something. And I was like, oh, and I mean, I'm 33, so maybe it's like $75 today with inflation, right? And like, especially for a 15-year-old, I was like, oh, like this is it. Like, this is it. So, that was probably my first, like, people say you never forget like the first dollar you made online. That was like my aha moment. Like, whoa, this crazy money. This is a magical place.
And so was it before or after that point where you tried to, I think it was smelting gold in your bedroom or something to flip it
Yeah, so
online?
that
Is
was
that, is
lit.
that
So
part of
on
that?
that, so it's called Gold Piece XL because I was like trying to smelt gold and stuff. Like I bought all this scrap jewelry. Like I on Craigslist had bought like all this scrap gold jewelry and had bought like some PDF ebook on how to smelt gold. I was like for sure. I mean, I can't even tell you what an angel my mom is for putting up with me, but like the idea that like forget me doing fireworks and stuff in my bedroom in Manhattan, like the idea that I was really actually ready to like melt down gold and like separate it from its whatever it had been mixed with is just sheer insanity. But I had no clue, right, how difficult that'd be. So that was probably around the same time. I mean, I was that classic. I like to think that I'm unique, but I'm not. Like I was that classic kid who was like cutting school to sell candy. Everyone was, like you talk to so many entrepreneurs, like, oh, I was selling candy. Like, yeah, like one of my high schools, we had 4 lunch periods because there was 4,800 kids, so we had 1,200 kids per lunch. Um, and I was not on the basketball team, but I recognized that the boxes of candy they were selling, I could probably find myself. And I think I took my mom's credit card, and I found them online. And I bought these like briefcases of candy that were the same ones the basketball team was selling. And I would just cut class and stand there in the lunchroom for 4 periods straight selling candy along with the basketball team. So I was like, I've been trying to scheme it together since I was a kid, for sure.
And where does this desire to scheme come from, do you think?
So it's funny because I now like wholly openly own the word scheme. But and like we'll tell you that like I was doing black hat internet marketing when I was a kid, like very what I'd say shady stuff, right? I and I don't want to get too tangential. I'll tell you something about that in a second. But I think it came from this. Uh, my father had been an entrepreneur, and before I was born, he was very successful. And my older sister, I think, grew up with a good amount of money, very upper class, went to private schools in New York City. And I think that my father's business really, well, I know my father's business really fell apart. And so I recently came to this realization that I had always just felt like I couldn't keep up with everyone. Like when I was going to private schools, I was on financial aid, right? Like me and my sister were sharing a bedroom. Again, I don't want to sit here and pretend like I slept on a dirt floor without electricity. I didn't have some horrific upbringing, but I think I felt like I was never enough and I could never keep up with my friends who had their parents' credit cards and stuff like that. So I just wanted to make my own money. I had less allowance than anyone. So I was always just trying to keep up and make my own money. Um, Really insecurity, ego stuff, unquestionably at this point. Um, but I openly say the word scheme now. But when I was like sort of coming up in my 20s, I remember I had a contract with Lionsgate Films. We were launching. I helped them launch a SVOD, subscription video on demand channel. And I sat there with this VP that brought me in as a contractor to help them do this. And I was like, oh well, how I got my start doing this shady internet marketing black hat stuff. And she was like, well, whatever you do, once we go into the other room, do not say the word scheme, do not say the word shady, do not, so it's become something I'm now like, I'm cool with again. But initially, I think people are often turned off by that pretty quickly.
Mhm. And I'm curious to how you mentioned a minute ago how obviously not going to dive deep into the importance of money, things like that. But how has your relationship with money changed? That you've been broke, you've made money. Obviously, as a kid growing up, it was all about just making money and as much as you can. But how has your relationship with money changed now, all these years later?
So my relationship with money has like, and again, this is wildly cliche. I've made enough money to recognize that money is not everything. That for sure has not really made me any less insatiable for trying to make more of it. Right? It's more that like this is just I realize that I love winning, and I really want to prove to everyone that I can do this in my own way, the way that I want to do it. And it happens to be that societally, that is until you are feeling good. I think better about yourself, you're often comparing yourself to others, right? And so the society's tally in terms of entrepreneurism is very much predicated on money, sadly, right? So I really just want to win. I just really just want to show people I can win. And then, but so in terms of how my relationship has changed, like I'll never be poor again. That's for sure. Like I'll never let myself be like in housing court, like crying to a judge with an eviction notice because I've been there, or like living in a 5-bedroom apartment with no electricity, and no hot water, or having my electricity cut off from Con Ed. Like I'll never let that happen again. But I think that like most people, as you grow up, you sort of start recognizing that like, oh, even the times when I've really had way more money than I needed, I still had these moments where I wanted something that I felt incomplete. That clearly, money is probably not the solution to most of my problems.
And so, like, I'm curious, like you talked about kind of living in 5-bedroom apartment, no electricity. How important is to that to where you are today? Because people always talk about like the hardships help you get to the good, like not the good ships, but the good parts of your life. And it's important to go through the struggle. But like, could you have gone to where you are today had you not lived in a 5-bedroom apartment with no electricity and stuff like that?
So it's funny because I grew up like again middle class in a nice rent controlled apartment in Manhattan, um, I'm like somewhat intelligent. Like I'm not the brightest kid in on the block, the brightest crayon in the box, but I had enough people telling me you can do whatever you want. You're really smart. You can do whatever. And oddly enough, I think that sort of hobbled me in many regards because I would like go to school and I'd be like, I can do whatever I want. They're all stupid, you know. So it wasn't until my 20s that I really like struggled, right? And like in my early 20s, and so like living with 4 roommates with no hot water, or my first apartment, which was this crappy little studio that shared a wall with a garage, uh, with Con Ed cut off my electricity. Like, I think those were like super, super, super important. things for me in terms of growing. So I guess, yeah, I don't think, and again, I don't think of myself as like being in this place where I'm so successful, right? But in terms of like, I do like who I am today and where I'm at today, and definitely the path that I'm on. And I for sure am a believer in like sort of chaos theory, butterfly effects type of stuff, where I think like every single thing that has happened in my life and the universe around me has sort of got me onto this conversation with you at this moment. So as long as I enjoy the path I'm on today, then I can only, attribute it to the things that have happened to me before. If that makes sense.
No, 100%. In terms of like the butterfly effect stuff, I think about all the time, like what small decision could I have made 4 years ago that would have had me nowhere, like that would have impacted where I am now, right? Like there's all these little things that added up to here. But I'm curious now, can you talk to me a little bit about liquid offers? Like how did that come to be? And I know we ultimately ended up exiting from that, but how did that start? Like what was the impetus of that?
So I was, and I think the way that it's interesting because I've now sort of grown a bit on Twitter, and Twitter's got this sort of internet marketing, hustle entrepreneur pseudo bullshit sort of community that I do sort of well in. And that really stems from me. I've been around these internet communities since I was a teenager. And so when I was a teenager, it was forums. And I became very active on forums. And I can tell you that same with Twitter and with forums that like 90% of people are like LARPing, right? Or just like totally live action role playing. It's just they say they do things that they don't do. Um, and I was not very successful, but I did okay with some affiliate marketing stuff. And I shared that stuff on these forums that had like millions of users and stuff. And so I became like a moderator on some very large internet marketing forums. A moderator and an administrator. Forget the difference between the two. I ran some large internet marketing forums that somebody else owned. Um, and I had been doing affiliate marketing. And without a long explanation of affiliate marketing, basically you have advertisers and publishers and a CPA or affiliate network that sits in the middle and brokers advertisements between publishers who post advertisements and advertisers who have the advertisements. So you want to sell iPhones, right? You go to a CPA network, Liquid offers a CPA network, and we find publishers to put out ads for you and give them a commission, and we take a vid off the middle. Anyway, I had sort of realized that I was getting a much, much, much higher payout on one offer, on one product than everyone else was. And realized there was just an opportunity for me to just become that middleman, right? It's really sort of feeds into what I try and do today, which is like to sort of like get rid of inefficiencies and like crush op and capex, right? Like with what I'm trying to do now. But at the time is the same thing. How do I get rid of this margin and get the margin for myself? So I went to one of the owners of one of these forums and I was like, hey man, I think that we could go direct to some of these advertisers and broker these ads, these offers to the people on the forums. And he was like, I'm down. We can push this as much as you want. You do the heavy lifting, we'll get it done. So we started Liquid Offers, which was like a private CPA network, private affiliate network, where we would invite people to come run traffic to ad campaigns for us. And it was like a masterclass in realizing the power of like positioning and authority. All sales and marketing is like literally just nothing but positioning and authority. Like the sales funnel is a function of trying to convince a prospect that you are in the position that you'd like them to perceive you in, right? So they end up buying from you. So at this point, because we were I was the moderator and he was the owner. When the owner of this forum that these kids are reading 8 hours a day says, "Hey, this is my ad network. You should join." Everyone joins, right? So we built Liquid Offers pretty quickly off of that, and then we sold it to a company called Empire Media. Ironically, I think they're both completely out of business today, so I'm not sure it was the best business in the world. And it was not some big exit; it was some very small number that felt just like a major feather in my cap as like a 20-year, 19, 20, so yeah.
That form was in Blackout World, was it?
It was Black Hat World. So I was a moderator on Black Hat World, and then I was an admin on MMD, which is Moneymaker Discussion, and then I was a just a normal poster on Wicked Fire. And but yes, I was a moderator on Black Hat World. So that was like where I spent. I remember dating a girl at the time, and she was like, "How come you're always on your computer looking at this like black screen with yellow type?" And it was Black Hat World. So yeah, it was at a different era of my life. Yeah.
No, for sure. And so after that, so you said late teens, early 20s is when you had this acquisition. And then is that when you started, like around that time, Tipping Point Agency? Is that when that came about?
Yeah, so Tipping Point was like just weird sort of catch-all of where I took a couple contractor friends, and but I mean it was really just like it had moments in my life where it was something and moments in my life where it was not much, right? And so what I did was um did like digital strategy stuff, but like also ended up I spent a few years of my early 20s being a nightclub promoter, and so I just had all the money go through that as well. And it's all about sort of angle, right? So I remember being like, in one regard, like I'm like launching SVOD channels for Lionsgate, right? And doing digital strategy for McKinsey. And then in another regard, like I'm texting 100 people a night and inviting them to a nightclub. Now, on a resume, it says that I ran, guerrilla marketing campaigns for Tao Group, right? Which is 100% literally true, right? Like we drove a ton of revenue through these nightclubs, just very different kinds of marketing, right? So Tipping Point was basically for like 7 or 8 years, just sort of how I like consolidated all the digital strategy work I did and all the marketing work that I did. And so that was like probably not as formal as it could have been because I was just messing around as a kid.
And then it was in your mid 20s. I have the quote written down here somewhere that is you wanted a change of life. So you ran off to Southeast Asia, right?
Sure. So yeah. So when I was, remember, I told you I had been working in nightclubs too, right? So interestingly enough, I lived this sort of dual life where neither of the lives knew about each other, right? So like when I'm promoting a nightclub, I'm not telling the club kids I'm hanging out with that like also during the day I'm click clacking away on a keyboard doing digital strategy because I just thought it wasn't cool. Just the stupidest thing on the planet. And then obviously you know, while I'm going to the BlackRock building and doing stuff for McKinsey, I'm not like, oh, by the way, I was just at Marquee till 4 o'clock in the morning last night, right? So these were two worlds that didn't sort of mesh well. And when I was like 26, 27, my memory's so bad. I just like partied away in my 20s. But when I was 26, 27, I was like, I can't do this. This is way too much. I hated the nightlife stuff. It was like I was drinking 6 nights a week, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, for years on end. It was really holding me back, I think, from growing up in a lot of ways. And I took my one big client at the time, which was McKinsey, and I had a fully remote contract with them. So I went and called the nightclub company I was still working with, which is Tao Group. I have like a huge amount of respect for and love for those guys. Sold half their company for $500 million. And I was like, you guys, I quit. So sold everything I owned and packed up and moved to Kuala Lumpur and like did some very like eat, pray, love sort of like discovery of myself and like hopped around Southeast Asia. I mean, I lived in KL for like a year and hopped around Southeast Asia for half a year and sort of figured out.
And so I know it started as a backpacking trip first, and then I think it was after the backpacking trip when you decided to move. So I'm curious, like, how long did it take you to go from this backpacking trip to, you know what, I'm just gonna do the thing and sell everything and move? Because that's like a very kind of all in decision. So how long did it take you to make that call?
So I went backpacking for 6 weeks. Um, Fell in love with it. I had one friend living in Kuala Lumpur. He was like, "Listen, man, you should move out here. It'll change your life." Moved back and sort of got. I'm one of those people who like I sort of believe that when things feel like right when something is makes you feel uncomfortable is like probably the time to well either fully run away or fully dive into it, right? Like fully like just head first dive into it. And I like had just sort of discovered this whole like self improvement world vibe thing and like was like posting quotes of like life begins outside your comfort zone, like this kind of crap. And so I'm not a religious person at all. I don't not that I have any problem with people who are religious, but I myself am not a religious person at all. I'm pretty agnostic. I believe in something, I don't know what. But I had a moment walking down the street, I'll never forget this, where something, not like a voice, but I had this like gut urge. I've been talking about, oh, I want to move to Asia. I just want to do this. Say to me, like, oh, you have to do this. Like, this is like what you have to do. And it was without question, unequivocally the best thing I ever did in my entire life. So, I mean, within 3 months of moving back, I went for the summer backpacking and then I moved January 2016, I believe. So like, and it takes a little bit of planning and setting up before it's like finding an apartment and stuff. So, and I guess in 2020, I had 2016, whatever. It was a January, and coming from, it can't be 2016 at all. But either way, it was a summer backpacking trip, and then the next January is when it went off.
And so why was it the best thing you ever did?
Well, so I never really gone to like a traditional. I dropped out of college second semester senior year because I'm an idiot, and I thought that was like a great idea. I also like, I come, apropos of talking about sort of what drives me, and like my mom went to Harvard, my dad went to Yale, both my sisters had multiple degrees, and I like went to 5 high schools. The first time I got kicked out of school was fourth grade, so like dropping out of college was pretty in line with James, but like was a real sort of statement to everyone, like I'm going to do this on my own. I dropped out second semester senior year with 8 credits left. Like so to this day, I have less than a semester left of college. So I never really had that. I think that people need, whether it's college or for me it was Asia, need to like fully get outside their comfort zone, have their world fucking rocked, and let them see sort of that there are people with from all walks of life, you know, and even though I grew up, we started this talking about how, vibrant and unique New York City is, right? They're all New York City kids at the same time, right? So and even though they're all different, they all fit in this bucket of being city kids growing up. And the Lord knows I'd not spent time in, Southeast Asia, except for a quick backpack. But like, it felt like a college experience to me, right? Like I ended up making some friends, moved in the same building as them. I had like 5 best friends. We all lived in the same building. Like, probably the sickest dorm ever. It was a 4-star hotel that cost $575 a month to live in. So like every Sunday, like I'd go up to the roof and drink a beer by the infinity pool on the 50th floor and order a burger. And, so my point is like, I just genuinely believe that people need to really step outside their comfort zone. And this was really stepping outside my comfort zone. It also allowed me to get out of like the nightlife party world where I was like really sucked into, and I wouldn't say I was like addicted to booze, but I was addicted to that scene. I was addicted to partying. Which is like just like, and I have a lot of friends who still work in that space. Like I love it. I'm not knocking it. It just was not for me. And sort of like ripping that band-aid off was the way to do it, and allowed me to believe. And I think that very often we have like the way that we identify is so predicated on what we think of ourselves. We assume that people think stuff about us. Um, but like I went from telling everyone like, oh, I'm a promoter, right? Like and doing this digital work on the side quietly into like I've realized like, well, what I want to do, like I want to be a digital strategist. Like I want to do this stuff. And so like once I sort of shook myself clean from that sort of identity, it allowed me to sort of create this whole new identity in which I was confident being me. So when I came back and I wasn't like embarrassed, like, oh, well, this is what I do for a living, right? Like this is just who I am. This is what I do. So I think it's important for everyone, but I think it was super transformative for me to just like rip me out of my routine and throw me into something that was completely different. Because it allowed me to sort of rebuild from scratch, sort of. Does that make sense?
No, for sure. And I'm curious how you're getting out of your comfort zone today, because I believe that your comfort zone expands. Like as you step out of it, it eventually expands and envelops you again. So you have to constantly be stepping out of it. So what are you doing today now to keep making sure you're staying outside of your comfort zone?
That's a great question. So at this exact moment, not an immense amount, and so I think that it's actually very interesting you asked, because before this, I had a call with someone talking about how I've thought about moving a lot to LA. I live in New York City. I'm currently I just moved out of an apartment that I lived in for 3 years, and then one of my sisters has like an extra apartment, so she's like, oh, you can just go stay there while you figure out if I want to move to LA. And so now I'm like living 30 blocks from my mom again, in the middle of Manhattan where I grew up, working on things that I'm pretty comfortable doing. And so I've been trying to figure out how do I sort of step back outside the comfort zone again. So, um, you know, earlier this year, I started this company, Common Commerce, and the idea was to like acquire direct to consumer brands. And I had never done that. I bought and sold a bunch of like websites, like content websites, but like actual real brands doing millions of dollars a year. It was like a pretty new thing to me. So that was sort of a big step, I think, outside my comfort zone to like, I can do this. And then now what I'm trying to do, I won't get into completely, but I'm trying to think even bigger and bigger and bigger, because even now today, like forget the revenue that we'll do today, which is good money. Like I talk to people and they're like, oh, you're still just thinking way too small, like way, way, way too small. So in terms of stepping outside my comfort zone, we're going to do like a capital raise and sort of start trying to acquire some bigger brands. Um, I play with the idea of trying to build a small micro cap public company and use it like as the conduit to do M&A with stock on an exchange. But that's a whole complex talk through. But that's sort of my stepping outside my comfort zone sort of moment.
Okay. And I do want to talk about common commerce, but I think it's important to talk about kind of your second exit with the marijuana company, because I believe it was it a roll up as well? Like was that kind of the marijuana company? Was it kind of
So it was like very weird. So I could never redesign it ever, 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 and it only makes sense to people when I explain it to them. So I was moving back from Asia, or I was visiting from Asia. I had a quick stop for a little while in London, doing some stuff, and visiting some family. And I had an old friend from a nightclub who ended up being sort of like a Wall Street whiz kid, so to speak. And he was like, "Check it out, man! Like my old mentor like left the NYMEX to go work at Americanex. So NYMEX is a commodities exchange to go work at Americanex, which was like this like fledgling cannabis exchange. I believe cannabis is going to be the next commodity. So I sat down in a WeWork with him and took over a conference room with like whiteboard walls everywhere, and he just basically spent 2 days straight like explaining to me market microstructure and how equities markets work, all this. And he was like, "We should just start something this. I already started a blog in this space. Can you help me with it? Because I know that you know all this marketing stuff." But ironically, we met in a nightclub, right? And this is what shows you like there's some certain things in life you just need to start. Some wins are quantitative and some are qualitative, right? And so quantitatively, I had a brief stint being a mentor at Google Launchpad, which is at one of their tech accelerators. And quantitatively, it was not a win at all. I mean, I had to bring myself to London and pay to live in London and do this, right? But qualitatively, like being connected to that and being a mentor at one of their accelerators was pretty major for me, right? So people all of a sudden were like, "Oh, whoa, dude, work at Google." So anyway, so he trusted me and believed in me because of this recent stint at Google. So I was like, "Yeah, man, let's do this." And we decided I was going to help him grow this cannabis investment blog, and I had a sort of a friend whose father I'd known since private school, one of the private high schools I went to, who owned an investment bank, and they got sort of wind of that we were working on something, and they called us up to this investment bank. We're like, "Yeah, you want some money?" Essentially, and we're like, "Sure." And we took a pretty, I don't harbor any ill will, but pretty like predatory deal from them very early on, which was just like, "Hey, we're going to give you this money, and it's going to be as debt to you personally, and we want a big equity kicker in your company, and anything you do in the cannabis space over the next X amount of years." So, long story short, we built this what ended up becoming one of the largest financial news websites in the cannabis space, which is pretty niche. We were doing a few million uniques a year, 40,000 subscribers, and we were being very good uh, about not like putting price targets on companies and buy signals. We were doing real like actual trying to be really unbiased news stuff. So we got to know a lot of people, and it ended up becoming a great deal flow engine for us. So we ended up taking a lot of consulting work, often where I was doing digital strategy or we're helping with capital raising introductions. All the investment banks were reading our website, all the funds were reading our website, so we had access to all these people. And we ended up getting, in lieu of cash, a lot of the deals we took were in lieu of cash, we took equity. And so almost like venture style, almost like value added PE or venture investing, where we just like ended up with blocks of companies that were totally worthless, and then some that were not, some that were not worthless at all, that became much, 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 much bigger than we thought, or than I thought. And so we ended up owning a few websites that sort of worked in an ecosystem together. And we actually, interestingly, turned down a buyout from High Times. I still have the term sheet. But I remember sitting there we had a $2 million term sheet. I had to show it to someone the other day just for a story about it. But $2 million term sheet from High Times to buy our company, and like sat there and we're like, "No, we're gonna hold on to this." And for a long time, I thought it was the dumbest, worst decision I've made in my life. It ended up working out, but for a long time was overwhelming. So we ended up with this like weird hodgepodge holdings company where we own these cannabis investment websites and some drop shipping bong websites and stuff like that. And also like a bunch of we built basically these news aggregators for like the REITs and health tech and all that stuff. Anyway, all about public equities for these industries. And these guys came along and we're talking about we at one point we're just gonna like sell everything off and go our separate ways because I think we were sort of done with the roller coaster. And we figured out, in great part due to my partner, who's again a fucking genius, and having a bunch of investment makers in our corner, figured out like a much more accretive deal structure in which instead of just selling everything off bit by bit and then dividending it out to everyone, that somebody could just acquire us in whole, and that we would help them then like sell off certain assets and build certain ones and this and that. So it was like the weirdest, most complex structure that I could never redesign ever again in my entire life. Got some cash, a lot of stock. Half of it was earned out with consulting agreements. Another half of it was already issued and had clawback provisions on it in case we didn't hit certain KPIs. So yeah, it taught me a lot about M&A. It taught me a lot about that world. So
No kidding. I think it's interesting that you took kind of equity in companies in terms instead of just taking straight up cash. Like I have a client that did that, but he did it with search. Like he was running a search firm. He ended up doing kind of with the bigger clients, he would just do it for cash. Then with some of those smaller ones, he would just take it in stock. And he says the way he describes, like he built up those lottery tickets, and then some of them hit, and then he got into investing that way, which I think is super interesting. And one thing before we kind of get into common commerce from that, you talked about how you grew that blog because it started pretty small. Is this the blog you took from $2K a month in revenue to $100K a month, less than a quarter?
we were doing no. That's something different. Well, I guess we probably did actually at one point take it. Well, when I came to it, it was a Wix website. It was built on Wix and was doing like 200 people a month. We ended up growing it before we ever even fully 301 redirected it to a new domain and built it on WordPress. We grew to the point where like we were like calling Wix like, hey, can you please upgrade us? And they're like, you're on our biggest plan. I mean, we were doing a lot of traffic. I mean, Wix is not meant for news websites for sure. It's meant for a business card, essentially. You know, we this I'm trying to think about the actual revenue numbers of how quickly it grew. I mean, we're definitely doing $100,000 a month on it, but again, that was through like weird structures, right? Like that was through like, and I can tell you like what people ask what I'm good at. Like I'm good at monetization and customer acquisition, right? And sometimes monetization has to do with like understanding that it's you can make more money than just me saying to you, hey, pay me $1 for this, right? You can take blocks of stock, you can take equity, you can do rev shares. There's really weird ways to do all that. So I don't even know which reference that was exactly, but quite possibly. I mean, quite possibly. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple projects I've worked on where like we went from like there was one last year that I ended up buying the company this year, but I was consulting them last year. They were doing like 50K a month, and then we in a month got them to 252K, right? Like, which is a pretty drastic jump. I mean, not just me. A lot of people. They have a whole team of really awesome people that I work with now every day that are better and smarter than me, but like with a little bit of guidance and some changes made a big difference.
And so was it from the acquisition of DMO Holdings that you used that money to start Common Commerce, or what was kind of like the transition there?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, essentially, and live off it. But but yeah, I mean, the first thing I did was buy a house, which was and I don't mean like in a smart way, like I'm going to live in this house and have a roof over my head. I was like, I'm going to be a real estate investor. I get this. This is easy. So what I learned is that it's really easy to underwrite single family homes. It's really difficult to flip them, especially out of state. And I can't build IKEA furniture. So like I bought a house in Philly and renovated it. But instead of like, I should have painted the walls and changed an appliance. Like I added a floor, I added 2 bedrooms, I added 2 bathrooms, I added a deck on the back. I mean, I fully basically built a new house and like hardly escaped alive. Um, uh, but yeah, so that's sort of what seeded Common Commerce. Common Commerce, without getting into like a very long, complex explanation of it, was more of like an interesting creative deal structure where I did not have to put up nearly as much money as people assume I would have had to put up. And all that made definitely spent money, but it was not like I didn't just put up millions of dollars to buy these businesses outright, right? It became sort of like, how do we do this creatively and smartly while I still maintain control and have this e-commerce.
And I also just say too that part of the reason you did common commerce was that you didn't want to start from scratch again, and this kind of allowed you to leapfrog some of that early stages. Is that true?
Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting because like I now have this like sort of side business, which is like an info product business, kind of like which is like Nano Flips, and like it's become like abundantly clear to me very recently that like I do own 100% of that, and like it might actually end up being like a cash cow, but like I never intended for that. With that said, like I still sort of believe that like if you want to become like obscenely wealthy, build something from scratch. For fucking sure, there's no question that is the most there's the most alpha in that scenario. Um, but yeah, I just like I've tried so many things, man. Like I've tried so many things, and so many of them have failed that I recognize that there was a 99% of things fail trying to go from 0 to 1. If you can just get something that's already at 1, like it's much easier for me to look at a business. This is why I'm good at consulting. It's easy for me to look at a business and figure out like what are the levers that we can change to like increase efficiency or like crush OpEx or make more money. Um, but that only functions like if you're already making money, right? Like if you're at 0, there's no lever for me to pull except for grow, right? And so yeah, so thesis has been for the past like 7 or 8 months is like to buy instead of
Kind of with on a minute for with those failures. What's the one that you look back on the most that you're like, I can't believe I thought that was going to work? Like, what's like the worst of the failures you've had?
well, smelting gold is a pretty bad one. Trying to smelt down gold is a pretty bad one. I don't know. We've had some decent ideas. I mean, I had a t-shirt company that I tried to run. That was like my first like sort of kind of success. My old business partner is now like one of the most famous sneaker designers in the world. So like it's funny that he became so successful, and that was like such a joke. But really, really big fail is probably the smelting gold was the dumbest one. Um, I've definitely thought about like trying to buy land and throw like a windmill up. And what's funny about any of this is like it's not like that's the dumbest idea. It's just the dumbest idea for someone who has no idea about anything like that, right? And that's one thing I've realized is that like it's some of these ideas aren't just like stupid. It's just like without the right sort of base knowledge and understanding of how something works, it's just insane to try and go at that. It's more, I can tell you, I've got more examples of things that were working and that I didn't recognize because I was too young that if I just stuck with them, they would have been really successful. But I sort of just like let them fall to the wayside because the road got bumpy. And like I've got more examples of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so give me some of those examples then, because I feel like especially because you stopped because the road got bumpy, and I feel like that's going to happen with everyone. So, what are some of those things you give up too early on?
So I've had agency wise stuff. Like we talk about tipping point, and at one point I was doing something called Growthly, which was like an inside tipping point. I was doing just social media management, just growing social media profiles for people. But I can tell you that like from the services industry perspective, and I've seen this every day with people, is that like if you're going to grow an agency or a business that is purely predicated off of your time, at some point you're going to have to make a decision to make significantly less money for a brief period of time so that you can hire somebody so that you can then go get more business, right? So there was definitely points in my life where, I was like 25 making 12K a month, right? Like, which is perfectly good money, for a college dropout at 25, no question. Or more. But I never, to grow it, I would have had to make a decision to say, I need to go hire someone for 90K a year right now, right? And I'm going to have to just go suck up making 5K a month for the next 6 months, right? While I go find new business. And then this machine, you have to feed the beast, so to speak, right? And so I watch it happen with agency owners all the time. Everyone on the planet who's got an LLC that does services owns an agency. That is the most common thing. I'm not knocking it, but there's a really big difference between working for yourself and owning a business. And I think that most people that own like micro agencies, the tiny agency world, basically you're an independent contractor that knows some other contractors. They get stuck working for themselves instead of owning a business. And owning that business, I mean, this is a cliche, but becomes like removing yourself from that business. And sometimes it means getting paid less money, right? Well, everyone makes more money, right? Because later on in my life, I was paying people salary when I wasn't taking a salary. Like I mean, at Common Commerce, I don't take a salary. Like that's everyone's on salary with James. So, or as an independent contractor, you know what I mean? Like is on either 1099 or W-2, everyone but me. Um, so yeah, so I think that part of it is like understanding that like sometimes it's okay to take one step back if it means it's followed by two steps forward, and that like you have to sort of be able to be okay with that, and then also recognize one thing that really just life wise, but business wise specifically, is that things aren't like linear. Like success is not linear, right? And that like as long as you're trending upwards, so like if you're looking at like a chart and you're talking about like something like a stock going up, right? Like you want like higher highs and higher lows, but there are higher lows, right? Like the lows are there. You just want to go up, right? And so that sometimes it just because it comes down for a second doesn't mean that it's like all going to zero. And I think that our gut reaction until we are all older and stable is that as soon as something starts falling apart is to be like, oh no, we like getting our own way. We're like, oh no, this is a bad idea. This isn't working. I should probably just do something different instead. Right. And then you recognize as you get older that like sometimes, I mean, everything goes up and down and up and down and up and down. Right. And so the trick is like, as long as your lows are higher than your more recent lows, and then sometimes there'll be a much lower low. But I mean, it's, unless you are, I realized a long time ago that I'm not going to be, do I think I could be some massively multi-billionaire successful person? 100%. But I'm not like a Steve Jobs. I'm not a Bill Gates. I'm not some like luminary. I'm not Jeff Bezos. Like I don't have creative enough ideas, right? So instead of like trying to ride these things that just are going to be just unprofitable for 20 years, right? And just a huge nightmare. And to mitigate for myself, because I still get uncomfortable with the up, down. Like when you're those luminaries, it's just like, and then finally hockey stick, right? And so for me, I do need like forward momentum. So I can handle the up, down, but I still need to see things trending upwards. So I think that like recognizing that just because something is down today does not mean that you are not trending upwards. So that was, if I look back at some businesses that I had, uh, I sort of let them go on a down moment, even though that down moment was better than the more recent down. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. I think it's a really important thing for people to hear. The fact that it's not linear and that's going to happen. And I think it's super relatable to me personally when you're talking about the agencies there. So, like a little context for you, by the time this episode comes out, I will have just started a full-time job with one of my clients actually, because I was in the agency, the contract thing where I was just like, I realized that in order to grow it, I'd have to take that step back and hire someone. And I was like, and I really just didn't want to. Like that didn't excite me and it wasn't something I want to do. So I was like, well, if I don't want to do it, then I need to figure out what's next. And one of my clients is a tech company. They're growing super fast. They're in a fast growing sector. So I was like, I just want to jump on that rocket ship and go with them. And so I made the decision ultimately to kind of collapse the agency and join them full time just because I felt like I didn't have the passion for the agency and I just thought it was a good opportunity. So I jumped at it. So I think it's super interesting that like that was one of the things that you picked up on because that's something I just experienced over these last couple months, year or so. But back to Common Commerce here now. I want to dive in a little bit because I'm super interested into what you're doing there with Common Commerce. So the goal with it is your big picture goal is $100 million in revenue through acquisitions, right? Is that still kind of the aim with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I don't want to make myself short sighted. The thing is, I know it sounds ridiculous to some people, but I just see $100 million as like totally cheap, right? Again, because we're again, I'm talking about acquisitions, right? Again, I'm not talking about going from 0 to 100 million. I'm talking about taking things and folding in more and more things that are making money, right? So this is why it becomes more cheap. Really quickly, I do want to touch on something that you said about taking a job with a client just before we lose that. Is that I think people don't recognize, first of all, it's what you want to do. Second of all, you want to make a lot of money. I can tell you, I've got some friends who like, my friend Seth, shout out if he ever listens to this, has like a superpower. And his superpower is like joining venture-backed tech startups at the exact right time. And so he was like very early at Lyft, and now he was very early at TikTok. And like my point is that like Seth is going to do and has done obscenely well from riding the right wave, and I think loves what he does instead of doing it on his own. So I just wanted to say that that's like, people ask me how to make a lot of money, enterprise tech sales or jumping on a venture-backed tech startup that will IPO. I think you're probably the best. But so yeah, so 100 million I think is just totally reasonable in the next couple of years. It doesn't seem crazy to me at all. I mean, I've got enough deal flow in the past 6 months that if I'd had the capital, could be at 70 right now. So it's just a different mindset. It's just looking at business completely differently than I think most entrepreneurs do. It's really more about like coming at it from more of like a banker's mentality, which is that like when I go and try and borrow or raise money, if I wanted to go raise $5 million to buy a business, I would have a harder time doing that than raising $50 million to buy a business. And that's because if you are an institution, like if you're a fund or a bank, like if they take carry, or let's say we're talking about debt, right? Like let's just say make the math really easy and say that to 10%, you're paying 10% on the debt for acquisitions, right? I borrow money to buy companies. If I'm a bank, would I rather lend you $100 million and make $10 million, or would I rather lend you $1 million and make $100,000? Like unequivocally, every time I'd rather give you $100 million, right? Like it's just like that is the biz, that is how they make their money, right? So like what you realize is that like when you start to deal with institutional capital, where I'm not really at, but I'm starting to dabble in that space, is they just want you to go bigger, right? They just want you to go bigger because bigger is safer in many regards, right? So like if with $100 million you can buy a business that's doing $50 million in revenue and $5 million in EBITDA, great. It's a great business, right? Like, I mean, well, the math doesn't work out. I probably wouldn't borrow that money for that business, but you get my point. It's like a company that's spitting off tons of free cash flow probably survives whether I'm there or not. If I go buy $1 million business, that's an owner operated business for sure, and is very predicated on me. You go buy $100 million business, there are probably 500 people that work there, and a singular one of them being gone does not make or break that business. So institutions are more interested in writing larger checks as long as they have any sort of trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's like the difference between you buying a business versus buying a job, right?
Totally. Yeah, and most, I'd say most, I play in the space where we're looking at businesses doing like 500K plus in EBITDA, so 500 to like 2 million in EBITDA. So that's like it's sort of like a weird sweet spot, I think, where it's probably owner operated. You have an owner who's paying himself like 700 grand a year. They work 120 hours a week. They can't scale because they're overworked. They don't really understand the mechanics of how to make it go to that next level. But there's enough meat on the bone that I could replace them and put in the differences to make it scale. The problem is like I didn't think big enough with this, which is that like the debt world, for example, which is how we look at doing acquisitions now. The debt world really opens up at like 5 million plus in EBITDA. You have this whole, like right now I talk to mezz debt funds that want to give me not particularly nice terms. Some of them want me to personally guarantee it. I mean, it's 33. I'm not really interested in personally guaranteeing a $5 million loan right now. But if you get big enough, there's no personal guarantee. Like if an investment bank writes you a bond, $150 million bond, they're not like calling the CEO, like, are you willing to personally guarantee this bond instrument that we're going to sell to our clients? Like that just doesn't exist, right? Like it's just far too big. So the goal, it's sort of the idea is if you can get bigger, you sort of remove yourself from some of that risk and responsibility, so to speak. If that makes sense.
And so, and talk to me then about the advantages of doing a roll up, because I know that's part of it, right? Is that kind of like a shared agencies model or something like that? Like, what are the advantages of rolling it all together?
To make it as like simple as possible. So yeah, it's a shared services model, 100%. Even looked at just buying an agency outright and putting them inside. Because like I don't really care how, as long as everyone gets their salary, right? Then all the equity owners like myself up top, like we don't really care how money flows around between each subsidiary. Because the point is whatever's left over just floats up to the top, right? It gets consolidated and goes up to the parent company, which is Common Commerce. So the efficiencies, basically we are looking to crush or get rid of OPEX, operational expenditures. So agencies is the easiest way to do this, to explain it. Media buying. Let's say you're paying a media buying agency $5,000 a month plus 10% of ad spend or some bonus on ROAS, return on ads, whatever it is, right? So I can tell you that like we might pay an agency, let's say we're spending 200K a month. Okay, maybe I'm paying that agency $15,000 a month for that media buyer. I'm also paying for the overhead of their account manager. I'm also paying the overhead of their office, their CEO, all those things. I also have those in house, right? So that I eventually, let's say I bought 5 of these brands. Now, let's say we're spending $300,000 a month on each brand. I'm paying each agency $20,000. Okay, so I'm spending $100,000 a month on a media buyers at this point, which means I'm spending $1.2 million a year paying something that probably 2 media buyers could do. Right, 5 accounts. I know guys that work at, I know media buyers agencies that are running 7 accounts right now for sure. So let's say one could handle 5 to keep it simple, right? And big enough, you're doing 5 on 1, right? I mean, we're just you're $100 million is different, right? But for now, so let's say you get 2 media buyers, a senior and a junior, right? So those 2 people, not to be a dick, but I'm not paying them you know, whatever. You know what I'm saying? I'm not paying them over $1 million in salary. So if I take these 5 brands and I bring them in house, just on the media buying agency fees, I might be able to save $700,000 in OpEx. I mean, maybe I paid one of them 160 and the other one like 120. 160 is a nice salary. I don't think that most media buying agencies are paying 160 grand in salary. So let's say I pay 140, 160. Okay, so now they're really incentivized to help us. They really align them with a little bit of equity, and they're checking campaigns on Saturdays and Sundays as well because it's their baby too. And now I just saved $700,000, right? So now we do that with accounting, we do that with legal, we do that with creative, we do that with everything, right? And so I think there's a lot of inefficiencies. The agency model is great for a singular brand. There's a lot of inefficiencies that you can get rid of excuse me, if you own like 5 or 6. And we could extrapolate that and go further too into like, you know, into like 3PL. I'm sure, there's a lot of opportunity for me to get better deals if all of a sudden I'm shipping out $5 million a month in product instead of $1 million a month in product. Um, you know, Manufacturing, that's even more complex. But at the lowest level, it's clear to me is the agency stuff, is the inefficiencies that come from hiring agencies.
Is there ever a point now? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we've only acquired one company so far, kind of looking at
Yeah,
a couple others at the moment. But it's like kind of play with long term on that. Like, at what point does the roll up, does it get too big where it doesn't work with having kind of an internal team, or you're going to have to start breaking out having individual teams for each brand, like where it becomes so big that you can't just have a couple people to save costs? Like, how much, or can you just kind of do this forever?
It really depends. It really depends on a lot of things. Like do you have a singular brand that becomes breakout, right? Like because like if all of a sudden one brand is doing $100 million a year, there's no way that we're like sharing services for that brand, right? Like everyone is full time in house working on that company, right? Um, so it really depends. It really, really, really depends. Like how many SKUs are we selling? Are there, right now the first brand has, we sell like less than 10 items, right? So that's not wildly complex from like an inventory management and like a supply chain management, scenario. But like I would never buy an apparel brand, for example, right? Like partially because of this, right? And partially because like the scalability of something with like 1,000 SKUs becomes infinitely more complex than the scalability of something with 9 SKUs, right? They both require a different level of of of, uh, of love, so to speak. So I think you could probably grow. I think it's very, very reasonable to like top line. I think you could have 5 brands doing like between $5 and $20 million with each, with sort of a shared services model. Obviously, some of them end up starting having full time in house people singularly, but there's no question there's a lot of inefficiencies to get rid of. I mean, at scale, you start looking at tech as a way to scale to get rid of inefficiencies, especially with inventory management and stuff like that, right? And like POs, like purchase orders, and how you figure it out. Like Thrasio is doing this really at scale. So Thrasio is going into a SPAC at like a $10 billion valuation. They have acquired something like 300 Amazon FBA brands, some ridiculous number of brands. Now they don't worry about sort of what's interesting is that Amazon is a sales channel and a CMS, so it is like a content management system and a sales channel. Whereas for us, like Shopify is just a CMS, like it's not a sales channel. So like we do have a little bit more there to worry about. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, I'm just not trying to reinvent the wheel here, right? Like this is like standard. Like there are so many M&A shops that deal with like middle market firms that are just buying up like lower middle market services industries across America, like 400 HVAC companies, right? And the reality is that like right now, I give you an example of OpEx crushing with agency stuff that was like pretty extreme in terms of margins. Like that's really not what you're at $300 million a year. A 1% change in margin is $3 million, right? So like like, these inefficiencies that you're fixing for don't necessarily need to be 15% changes. Like in the scenario that I gave you with the media buying agency stuff, we're talking about going from spending $1 million a year to 300 grand a year. It's a pretty massive change, right? In a business that's top lining 20 million or something, right? Like very different if you are, you know, I'll give you an example. I was tertiarily involved in a transaction last year that fell through, but it was of a health tech company trying to buy a pharmacy chain. Pharmacy chain was losing about $1.5 million on $160 million in revenue. I mean, I can tell you exactly how we were going to change that. Basically, you're going to fire 2 C-suite people, and then we called United Healthcare, and we're like, okay, just change everyone's healthcare, right? So, like, because if you make a 2% change on 160 million, it's $3.2 million, right? So if you're losing 1.5, all of a sudden now you're making 1.7, right? So my point is that like the bigger you get, the less I think I hope. I obviously haven't taken it this far myself yet, but the less I think I need to worry about sort of massive changes in efficiency, and much more they become like, do we have the same CFO? Like do we buy one warehouse, right? Do we do fulfillment out of one warehouse that we own, right? As opposed to paying a 3PL company, that logistics. So.
Okay. And so was acquiring that pharmacy company, was that with Common Commerce or was that separately?
No, that was totally, totally different. Not anything. It was me basically as a consultant being involved in something. There's a couple of large transactions that I've been very lucky to be privy to and be involved in because of digital strategy side of me and because I understand the M&A. So these guys that do M&A have brought me in because they know they can talk to me in a certain way about something, but I can also sort of look at sort of the marketing aspect of the customer acquisition. But not me, nothing I owned. It was just something I was very lightly involved with.
Gotcha. And then so it's kind of talking about the target companies for Common Commerce. And clearly you're very thorough with your approach because it's been, I believe, over a year now. And like we only acquired the one company thus far. Obviously more kind of conversations are happening. But from my understanding, so I said in the intro, unsexy CPG brands, and you're looking for, I believe the number I found was 70% plus margins was the kind of the company or the products you were looking for. How hard is it to find something with 70% margin? Like you said, you're not doing clothing and stuff, which is obviously very low margin. So how hard is it to find something with that higher margin?
So I'll tell you. So first of all, we actually didn't really form Common Commerce. Like even though it had been like thought through, it wasn't actually formed until March of this year. So even though it had been thought through, do you see what I'm saying? So it's like it's not been a full year, and we closed our first acquisition in April. That's the first acquisition was there already. We had been talking about this. We just had to do the structure of it. So people sometimes like I'll tweet out like, "Hey, I don't have a business, 70+% gross margins, blah blah," and people always hit me up like, "What business are you talking about that has 70% gross margin?" There's certain industries that it's very common in. Beauty, super common. If you're under the impression that a jar of La Mer that costs $400 didn't cost more than $20 to make, then you're woefully mistaken, right? The beauty industry is full of super high gross margin products. Supplement industry, um, we tech can be that way for sure, for sure, for sure. Drastically higher, actually, even if you're really playing in the tech space. So it's not super easy. The reason that I'm interested in like a 70+% gross margin and like AOVs of over 50 or $60 for average order value is because these are, for the most part, what I look at is private label, right? And so I'm looking at competing with marketing, right? Which means that we're going to have to spend a lot of money on marketing. And so if we're going to spend a lot of money on performance marketing, then I need there to be a healthy enough margin for us to spend that money on marketing. So when you look at these FBA brands that Thrasio buys, for example, these FBA brands are like 30% gross margins, 25%. But again, they just put them on Amazon, right? Like Amazon is their sales channel as well. Versus we'll take a brand from nothing, like without having any customer at all. And so I'll tell you, we actually had an acquisition fall through recently. We're about to launch more venture studio wise. We've got the brand we acquired is a very clear specific demographic. And we feel like we've sort of maxed out our LTV on these customers because the products they buy, they're not consumables. It's you sort of buy one from us. There's not a ton more to buy. So we're going to launch a ancillary brand internally to go alongside that, and then cross sell the customers through post purchase email sequence. And so like that will be from scratch. With that said, like I'll pay $0 for traffic. I will drop ship the products initially purely as a function of making sure that I understand what SKUs people want to buy, and then eventually we will hold inventory off that. But that was not at all what the plan was with Common Commerce. It was just sort of this like we hit a wall with an acquisition and it didn't work out, and I really wanted to make sure the ball was moving forward. So it was like seemed like a very easy lift, so to speak. Like I know that we can get this off the ground for it's gonna sound crazy, but like I think we'll get it out of the gate, launched looking beautiful for less than $5,000, and we'll nothing crazy, but we'll do 15 or 20 grand a month off it, right? Top line. And if there's a there, then we will throw a lot more money at it.
And so you mentioned you're putting a lot of money into performance marketing. How much do you kind of balance that with branding, right? And I know, like you said, you've got some email sequences, so clearly you're collecting data and emails that way. But like you're also, I know you're very bullish on owning the channels, right? So like if you're going all in on performance marketing, how much of that is also considering branding in case those performance marketing channels change that you're then reliant on the brand?
So we're spending a good amount of money and time on SEO currently. The thing is like SEO wise, it's like sort of one of those things that like it's just unforgiving until one day it beautifully treats you well, and then it's unforgiving again. But so we are like probably 5 or 6 months into like a pretty aggressive, very white hat but aggressive SEO campaign. That like I'm not super. If in another 6 months we haven't seen any dividends start to pay from that, I'll be a little stressed out. But I'm not expecting it immediately. We're going to some pretty competitive keywords. So brand wise, you know, we it's we pay like actors, for we're paying for really good creative to be made. All the imagery is beautiful, everything's done well. With that said, my feeling is I have like a direct response marketing background, right? It's like affiliate marketing. Like, how do we get profitable on the front end? And I don't want to get like too esoteric about that, but is my thesis, and it's not my other people have this exact same thesis, but is we can take these like direct response marketing tactics and mix it with some good brand, i.e., what does that mean? It means some SEO, means some write-ups in publications, right? It means a couple influencers, right? So like brand is it's funny, man, because brand has totally changed today than when 50 years ago. And I'm not trying to build Crest or Colgate. I'm not worried about you walking into the store and buying my product off the shelf instead of someone else who recognize it. But like I think that with some good SEO and a couple write ups in publications and a couple sort of influencers, you can sort of create this cohesive feeling that starts to touch on to what brand really is. It matters a bit less for us with this first one, partially because, like I said, it's not consumable. It's not, we're winning on marketing. It is not as if I don't think there's a ton of research that's done before the sale. But as long as we can get for the ways that people might research us, as long as there's like a couple different signifiers of brand publications or you know owning the SERPs a little bit in Google, I think it's really what brand. I think it's really half of brand these days. Um, and I'm sure all my friends that run creative agencies would be appalled at anything I just said, and I'm sure they're right. Um, but yeah, so it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Does that answer that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think I'm curious in like what's your approach for LTV? Like I think I listened to a couple of the other podcasts you're on. Did I hear you say you're kind of working on a subscription membership or something like that? Like what are some ways you're looking to increase LTV? Because oftentimes brand is just associated with LTV, right? Like you want people to, like you said, coming into the store and picking Crest over Colgate because that's just the brand they identify with. But if you're also, like you said, brands change, so what are you doing now then to increase LTV?
So for us, increasing LTV is mostly tough because of this one brand. Like I said, is not consumable. Once you buy a product from us, you're unlikely to buy it again. If you do, it's because it broke, and you need another one, which is not a great sign for us. Um, so there's two ways we're looking at increasing LTV. One is that we're launching this ancillary brand to go along with it, right? And so for us, luckily, we own this parent company. So I get to look at LTV from a customer. I don't care whether, as long as they're in our ecosystem, I don't care whether they're buying from brand A 100 times in a row, or they buy from brand A, then B, then C, then D, then. Do you see what I'm saying? So like that's one way to increase LTV, which is to sort of start trying to track, build out other products and SKUs for people that we think they're likely to want. I think you can even start getting aggressive with affiliate marketing if you want. Like if you fully maxed out and you have an email list. I think, for example, if you sold pipes for, I don't know, if you sold toilet seat covers, I'm sure you could sell other plumbing affiliate offers, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Like later on down the line. But the other thing you brought up is this subscription model. And so what we've done is put together this basically like an Apple Care or or a AT&T insurance product. We basically put together an insurance product. It's a membership offer where you get a discount on certain certain things that we sell that go along with our main SKU that people get replacements of sometimes, as well as a replacement guarantee as long as you pay for this monthly. And I believe it's after 18 months, you're allowed to trade in your product for a brand new. Now, it works for us because, at $20 a month, after 18 months, it's $360. I can tell you that, our COGS are not $360, right? So, like, I'm happy for them to replace it. But the hope there is to add real MRR, right? Like in a really aggressive way, in much better than I have to keep fulfilling product for you, right? Like I hope we never have to replace your product, right? So yeah, so the idea there is you become a member, and as a member you get discounts at our shop, and in perpetuity as long as you pay, you get a replacement guarantee in products.
And so is that subscription service, is that going to be for all the companies like under the parent company, or are you going to be able to do it for each individual brand, have different subscriptions?
No, I mean, so because there's no cohesive. So like the second brand that we're launching alongside the one we acquired is like, even though like I think that like product wise that the customers are going to be interested, there's not really a cohesiveness between the two of them. It would be sort of weird. It'd be like walking into a mall and having like a mall discount. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just not going to make sense. Maybe possibly, but it's going to fit for now. It's fitting within the confines of this singular of the first brand that we acquired. Although I think it's a great function. I think it's a great way to increase LTV, especially if you sell like a decently high ticket product, right? Different if you sell custom mugs, right? But if you're selling an electronic, if you're selling something that costs $100, $200, I don't think it's insane for people to want to insure that product. My iPhone, I think I spend like $40 a month. Some like obscene amount of money. So that's sort of our clever way of increasing LTV. And the hope is to get sort of like between a 10 or 20% take rate on that offer. So between 1 in every 10 and 1 in every 5 people taking us up on the subscription.
And then what's deal flow look like? Like how are you going about sourcing these different companies that you're looking at?
So I'm very, 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 very blessed, and that I have a lot of people that follow me on Twitter, and that all I talk about is marketing and e-commerce essentially. And so one reason I go so crazy hard on Twitter is because I've recognized that it is like there's a term that private equity guys and girls love, and it's proprietary deal flow. And the reality is like I actually have real proprietary deal flow on Twitter, and it's sort of weird because if you talk to most people that are buying brands and companies, is that like by the time something gets to a broker, it's probably not the best thing, right? Like brokers traditionally have things that have been combed over by everyone already. So I mean, I look through brokerages all the time, like they're every day. And I think there's actually a lot of interesting stuff coming up on MicroAcquire, um, which is like kind of new, but they've got it's looking like some really great stuff on there. Problem is, like, I think anyone can list anything, so you just have to do a lot of fine tooth combing. But yeah, I mean, so for me, the first one was a brand I was consulting with last year. I've done a lot of consulting work for DTC brands, and so there's a couple that I approached that I saw opportunity with, and I was like, hey, like, what are your thoughts on this? And one of them was like, 100%, let's do it. Um, and then every once in a while, I'll just tweet out like, "Hey, do you have a business that's doing over $500,000 in EBITDA?" And luckily, like a good one of my tweets, like I have one that's about to go. It's like on 998,000 impressions right now, right? So it's like reaching 1 million people, and they're all within my demo, right? So it's been Twitter is a long story short.
And so I know you've been on Twitter since 2011, but when did you really kind of start to take it seriously? Like, when was that shift?
It's just funny. I probably need to go back and just like delete my old Twitter because I started taking Twitter seriously last year when I sold my company, or like when I knew I was going to sell it. Like I just was just getting, I had nothing to do, and I was just thought it was a lot of fun, and became totally addicted to the dopamine hit and the gamification of it. Um, 2011, I horrified to imagine what I was tweeting in 2011. But so probably, I mean, I can tell you like when I track what I do now on Twitter. Started really taking it seriously probably last September. And I had probably 800 followers last September. So I think I just settled over 27,000 today.
Wow. And so was there, because I think there was one thread that you posted, I think it was a website flipping thread, and that's really what kind of kicked off your growth, right? I think you more than doubled your followers in a day or something.
Oh, I went from like, yeah, I got 1,400 followers in a day from my first, and it's actually the pinned thread. It's funny because everyone saw it, people like, this website's not there anymore. I'm like, this is just a framework to follow. But it's sort of what made me, so my sort of niche, it's interesting how this becomes, I never wanted to be the website flipping guy, but I just sort of became the website flipping guy. I flip some websites. Uh, I get the mechanics of customer acquisition and monetization, which are the two levers that can be pulled for buying a website, making it better, and selling it. Right? That's all it is. Right? And so I added up. I think I've sold like 12 sites in my life. So I've like, it's not like I haven't done this a lot, but people say to me like, "Oh, how many websites do you flip a year?" Like people assume that I'm just like all I do is like wheel and deal, right? Um, and with common commerce, like I guess it's a flip. Like we'll look for an exit. You know what I mean? Like the idea is to like find liquidity for our equity at some point. But like I wouldn't call it a flip. I'd like to get like a 9-figure exit out of it. But I became the website flipping guy, and it was just because like I'm a firm believer in listening to like data. And the data told me that I needed to niche down, and people wanted to listen to me, people wanted to talk to me when I talked about flipping websites. And basically, it's just easy because all I talk about is just, again, it's monetization and growth, customer acquisition. Those are the levers they pull. And then now it's reached the point I wouldn't call it escape velocity, so to speak, but I get Twitter, and, I've probably done like the past 30 days, more like 5,000 or 6,000 followers in the past 30 days. Like I'm pretty confident I'll hit 50,000 this year. Um, I have some friends that I've actually met through Twitter who are very successful entrepreneurs. I think we're going to start a podcast, basically just where we just shoot the shit. Essentially, I'm sure no one will want to listen. But my point is that like it's more. I built a little side business off Twitter, which is cool. But the magic of Twitter to me has been like I think it is for sure above and beyond the best networking tool I've ever come across in my entire life by like multiple 10. Like makes LinkedIn trash. Um, Deal flow for common commerce, meeting mentors, meeting people I've looked up to, meeting great friends. So I probably will just continue to go pretty hard on that platform. But it's been the threads about website flipping that have made me grow so fast.
Okay. So what's kind of like the strategy? Like if I don't post like website flipping threads, like what's kind of that science, that 80%? I know the 20% of growing on LinkedIn is like just being interesting and having interesting thing to talk about. But like beyond that 20%, what's that 80% science? Like what's kind of the strategy? Obviously don't give away all your secrets, but like what's some things you can share with that within that 80% to help people kind of get started with Twitter growth?
I'll tell you the exact 80%. The reason I'll tell you the exact 80% is because it's 20% art. That's what I tell people about all this stuff, right? Is that like, I'll teach you the science for sure. Like, that's not hard. I can teach you the science of customer acquisition and monetization as well, right? Like, it's full of data. The reality is, like, are you going to be good? It's like writing. Like, I could show you how to write. Doesn't mean you're a great writer, right? So, I will tell you that with Twitter, that threads rule everything, which is that, like, take something that is complex and esoteric and seems unattainable, that you understand in depthly, and break it down in a way that anyone can understand in a thread. that's going to be probably the main key there. The other side of it is this is actually comes from this guy Pomp, said it way before me, but it's just like tweet in the beginning. You just want to be like tweeting so much that you're embarrassed by how much you're tweeting. Like I'm much more thoughtful with how I tweet now, but like I kind of you just want to overwhelm the algo. Once you get into the algorithm's favor, you want to keep feeding it more content, Um, and then everyone says this, but it's true. Like, bro, I literally respond to every comment that I have to the point that it's like sort of becoming almost unmanageable. Like I spend probably 2 to 3 hours a day on Twitter 7 days a week. And it's not like scrolling. It's for sure not scrolling and looking at tweets, right? It's like me tweeting and responding to people. So I realized I probably spend 90 hours a month on Twitter. So I spend 2 full work weeks, at least 2 full work weeks every month on Twitter. So I hope it's growing fast. Like when I think of it like that, like it better be growing fast. But being really engaging, commenting on big accounts, not just like that's cool, but like if someone with a big account that gets a lot of reach, commenting something really insightful and useful on their tweet, lets other people see it, brings them to your profile. The game is really having an engaging profile, which is like your landing page, and it explains what you do and why people should follow you, and then getting as many eyeballs on your profile as possible. So that happens through something like a great thread or commenting on other people's threads and tweets, or just tweeting a lot, and sort of following people, engaging with them. In the beginning, it's more about like really meaningful one-on-one relationships, and then eventually you sort of like it becomes less important. And I don't know, I've been very blessed. I got some very big accounts that follow me that like only follow like 10 people that like really helped me, I think, sort of grow quickly.
And so you're able to build Nano Flips was kind of like a spin-off from those threads, or did Nano Flips exist pre growing on Twitter?
Totally a spin off from those threads. I had no intention of doing anything. Nano Flips was just a total guess of a thing. I built those threads. People were like, "Oh, do you have a newsletter?" And I was like, "Oh, sure, I'll build a newsletter." Put a newsletter together, and then just about like breaking down how to flip websites and stuff. And then eventually someone was like, "Hey, you should sell a course." And I was like, "No, I don't really want to be that guy. It's not for me." And then I was an ex girlfriend was like taking a nap, and I was like, let me just see if I can do this. And I wrote one email, and I'm like a mediocre copywriter and definitely a mediocre web designer. And I built a really crappy landing page, sales page, and I sent one email, and I had 1,300 subscribers in total at that point, which was very small. And I made 17 grand in 36 hours, and I pre-sold a course that didn't exist yet. And I was like, if I put together a course on how to do these, would you guys buy it? Here's a link. If enough of you buy it, I'll make it. And sold, 84 copies at $195 in 36 hours. And then I was like, whoa, I guess I got to build this course now. So then I built a course, and then NanoFlip has just sort of taken off since then. And I don't really push my course. It's not something the value for me with Twitter is the network, right? It's like unequivocally is the network. It is like a weird superpower. If you don't believe that it is, like if you don't believe that we're all susceptible to social proof, you're wrong. You just like I'm just telling you right now, if your biggest celebrity or you've never met in your entire life or he looked up to you, reached out to you and was like, hey, let's work together, you would drop. I say this to people all the time. If Elon Musk reached out to you and was like, I need $10,000 to start this next company, as long as you believed it was actually Elon Musk asking for 10 grand, you'd find a way to come up with 10 grand to do this with Elon Musk, right? So that's just positioning. That's all it is. And authority. And so having lots of followers, whether people want to admit it or not, especially if you see that your friends follow someone, you trust follow someone, kind of gives that person a great role of authority, position of authority. And so for me, it's become like a superpower in that regard.
And so what do you think it is about website flipping that kind of has people paying you $70,000 without a course even existing? Like, I know there's total revenue from everyone, but like, what is it about website flipping that just keeps bringing people in?
The most people that like it are like real estate people. It's sort of a new asset class. I think it was very like timing of COVID was great. I think everyone was locked in their house, and all of a sudden I was talking about a way for them to invest in something that was like that they could manage themselves without leaving their house. And so I think that was good timing. It's sort of this like blue ocean, so to speak, this blue sky. Like just like there's infinite of it, right? There's just like there are well over 1 billion websites. There's as long as new things in the world are created, there'll be new websites. They are very low overhead. I mostly talk about like niche content websites, so it's like there's not a lot of like you don't need a massive amount of experience or operational expertise to make them happen. And just the return on the ROI is just nutty still. I actually look back and I posted something on Twitter about this. I don't know if you saw it, but I found a post that I did on Black Hat World like 12 years ago about selling a website. And I was like, all you got to do is build a website to make $500 a month, and you can sell it for $5,000. Something I said, right? A 10x monthly net revenue, that is crazy. That is such a great deal. That means you're making 100%. Like I could buy that property and make over 100% on it in a year. There's no investment. There's no asset class on the planet that could pay me 100% a year. And that's how new it was at the time. That's how new like idea of making money on the internet was at the time. So now, even today, the standard multiple is like a 3 to 5 year, net revenue multiple. So that means like even at a 5 year, that's $20, 20% cash on cash return unlevered, which is like really good. Like, and I tell people this all the time, like it's not fully passive. It is a little bit, you have to manage it a bit. But like if you want fully passive income, go invest in AT&T stock and get a 6% dividend yield, and that's the best you're going to get. And if they've done it for 50 years straight, right? Or the S&P will give you 1.2% dividend yield, right? You would have to look at like sort of D-class apartment rentals that probably would end up with tenants that defaulted to start finding 20, 30% cash on cash return. And what's exciting about the website flipping stuff is that's before you make any improvements, right? So it's not very difficult to find opportunities where I can find something that is to make 20% cash on cash immediately, and with some small improvements, make it 30% cash on cash immediately. And so I think people are really intrigued by that, mostly because it's great returns, but it's not like some total ridiculous, like I'm going to make you $100,000 next month. You're going to get rich doing this. Like it's not that. It's not at all. So I think people like that it's real and it seems manageable to them.
And so how much time, like if you were to buy a content website, like I hear buying a content website and I just think of the amount of time I put in a week doing content for my podcast and stuff, like how much time is actually required to buy and flip websites?
Sure. I think it really depends. I think that for your podcast, I'd be blown away if you didn't put in a ton of time. But if you bought a niche blog about iPhone cases, I can promise you wouldn't need to put nearly the amount of effort that you do into making content about iPhone cases. In fact, you wouldn't have to write said content yourself about iPhone case reviews. What I tell people is that, like, at a bare minimum, have there been websites that I've owned that I didn't touch for a month straight? For sure. Was that a good idea? Absolutely not. So what I tell people is that at a bare minimum, you want to have a couple hours a week you can dedicate to something. And that you're going to get out what you put in. If we're talking about growing through organic search or growing through social, like it's really just, are you going to put in more work? But maintaining, I would say if you were to buy some niche blog about microphones or iPhone cases or something, or dogs, right? I don't know. I would say that you needed a couple hours a week to be able to write a fresh piece of content and build a couple backlinks to it. Or like post on social media. The question is, do you want to maintain it or do you want it to grow? Right. And if you want it to grow, then it's a question of getting out what you put in. If you want to maintain it, it's about finding stable websites that have been, consistent in growing traffic and consistently in the SERPs for multiple years. And just making sure that you don't rock the boat too much. If that makes sense.
And then what are some of those things if you're maintaining? And granted, if we're veering too far into what you cover in Nano Flips, like let me know. We don't have to talk about it.
No, I don't care. Let's talk about. I'll tell everyone about everything. Yeah, for sure.
And so, like, I know you have like a checklist of things you look for in a website. So what are some of those things you look for in a content website that you can just go in right away and quickly change to increase the revenue if you just want to maintain it and not grow it?
So shout out to Ezoic, which is like it's funny. I literally have the Ezoic shirt here, but at the bare minimum, like most people put AdSense and Amazon Associates. These are the most common ways of monetizing content sites. That is the lazy man's monetization. There is, I would change the ad network is like the first most obvious thing, or it's not really change the ad network. That's a much longer explanation about like header bidding and how like demand works in ad networks. But point is, I would use Ezoic or like a Mediavine or an AdThrive, something that basically does ad ops, where they like will set up header bidding between 20 different ad networks at once, so that the highest bid for ads on your website is placed. optimize where the ads are, etc. That is going to be the like if you find a website that is on AdSense, that is monetization comes from AdSense, and you switch it to Ezoic, I can just tell you, I never guarantee anyone anything, but like with 99.9% guarantee that you will make more money. Maybe it's 10% more, maybe it's 100% more. I don't know, but that's the most basic, obvious one. Then with like Amazon Associates, there's like, are you using comparison tables when you talk about products? These are like weird, like, are you using the right affiliate programs? Can you get higher payout on an offer if you're using an affiliate program to monetize? Or if you're on Amazon Associates, for example, most people set up just like Amazon US. Is 2% of your traffic coming from Germany? If they are, you should also be setting it on a rotator so that when someone from Germany clicks, they're taking Amazon Germany, like into that program. Another one that's like not an immediate switch, but I like a lot is building newsletters. Like I'm a huge newsletter fan. So most people would think like obviously it's not gonna work for your iPhone blog, but like say you talk about dogs, golden retrievers, um, and you're getting 100,000 visits a month, right, from organic search, or from social, wherever you're getting 100,000 visits a month. And in content sites, normally you have like someone visits you, and you're like a bridge, and then they, if you're lucky, they click an ad, but you never see them ever again, right? That's all you are to them, and then they become somebody else's customer. So I think there's like a major opportunity to build niche newsletters, and I've done this with the marijuana stuff, right? The cannabis stuff, where you just aggregate content and become the source of trusted content. So, golden retrievers, building a newsletter about golden retrievers for golden retriever owners, and then every week you're just sending out a newsletter that comes with aggregated content. Some from you want to bring them back to your blog, make more ad revenue, perfect, and some from just Petco and wherever. Set up a Google alert, set up content, Raza, these different tools. There's a major opportunity there, and then you can bring people back to your website by having your content you put in the newsletter link back to your page, and then eventually you can sell sponsorship in that as well, or send out affiliate offers. But let's say you're getting 100,000 visits a month. Let's say you can capture 3% into a newsletter. Okay, so let's forget churn for a second because I don't want to run back to the envelope math on churn. But let's just say 2%, because some people are like 3%. Let's say 2%. For sure, you should be able to get 2% to an email list. 2% is 25,000 people a year at that rate, right? 2,000 people a month, 12 months, 24,000, 2 years, or 50,000 subs. I can tell you for sure, 50,000 subscribers that are actively opening and reading your emails are probably going to end up being worth more to you than the actual website was, right? So like that's like the idea with the site flipping stuff and Nano flips is like, how do we find these immediate changes? Affiliate networks, ad networks, comparison tables, changing titles and meta descriptions so that in SERPs you look more interesting when people are searching for you. There's a whole bunch of different shit. But how do we find like 5 or 6 things that make like a 2 or 3% difference immediately that are really just best practices that the old owner didn't implement because they seem too minuscule or they just overlooked them? So in month 1, we're trying to capture like 10 to 15% change pretty immediately. And then we look at like what is SEO or organic social or newsletters that we build out over the next 6 to 12 months. So this is like really a minimum year-long process, 6 to 12 month process. But by then, at the end of the year, you've maybe increased that revenue by 25, 30%. And if a website is selling for 3 times yearly revenue, then you just added a whole year's revenue to it. So anyway, you get my point.
Is there like a certain like value of website? Like is buying $1,000 website, is that worth it? Someone hearing this, like they might not want to throw $15,000-$20,000 at a website right away, but like, what is there like kind of like a minimum requirement to the price of website you should be looking at if you want to get into this?
So this is a moving target and not going to be a hard and fast rule. But what I normally tell people is that like at the bare minimum, you're going to want $5,000 or $10,000. Like if you're going to flip a website, because the flipping implies that we're finding inefficiencies that exist and making them better, right? And so like, but sub that, there's not many inefficiencies to find because there's just nothing happening, right? So if a website sells for, let's say, just for the sake of it, 50x on monthly revenue. So, okay, so a $5,000 website's making $100 a month. Okay, so if I change revenue by 10%, great, you made $10 more a month. It's not really going to be that significant to you until the flip portion of it, which is great. But what I say is that 5 or 10K is the minimum. I'd say that the stuff that I talk about and teach probably works sub $1 million. At above $1 million, you find like a much more sophisticated pool of buyers. You find a much more sophisticated pool of sellers that have maxed out things a lot. But then sub 5K, there's definitely opportunities. I often are suggesting that people go look at like buying an expired domain at sub 5K, like going and spending $1,500 on a great domain name that somebody tried to build something on that totally failed and already has 3,000 backlinks that would have taken you 2 years to build, and building on that, and you're going to start ranking much more more quickly. And then yeah, sub 3K, I just don't think this is the world for you. You know, like unless you're gonna find someone to partner with you that's gonna to fund you or that has a website. You know what I mean? But yeah, five is the real is the bottom I say for flipping for sure.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier how you think that this might be the cash cow. Why is that?
I mean, without getting too into it, I have without really trying hard. So I really think about equity plays, right? Common commerce. I don't make, like I said, I don't take a salary. I think about equity because I believe that well, I know people really get rich off equity, right? Like there's no one worth $1 billion that got there through a salary. That's just for sure, right? They came from equity. Just unequivocally, I'm 100% sure of it. Whether or not maybe even the multi-$100 million range, or even the even the 8-figure range, I would bet came from like options and equity for partners in firms, right? It's very rare that on a salary someone's ending up with $30+ million. So I'm a firm believer in big wealth coming from equity. So Nano Flips is just like I think I've got a really good product that works and is a better angle on the most beaten down offer of all time, which is real estate. I think that if you look at the info product world, everyone on the planet sells you courses on how to flip houses, how to wholesale houses, how to do that. And I think that like my angle is like, let me show you digital real estate. You know, give me 2 minutes of your time and I'm going to show you an asset class that you didn't even know existed that gives you better returns, is easier to do, and is safer to do from your home. And so I organically will do good money off that offer this year. And that's why I say it's the cash cow. And I think that I've started to partner with some people. I think we're going to ramp it up and run paid to it. And I think it'll be a 7-figure a year offer. Like I think we'll do as an info product business 7 figures a year. You know, people ask me all the time, well, why don't you just do this? Why don't you buy this site? First of all, I'm buying sites, right? It really fits into my, like, it's like, feels very good for me as someone that sells an info product. Like, I literally just like, I'm trying to show you what I do for a living, right? And so, like, it feels very comfortable to me. And the sites I'm buying, I'm not trying to show people sites that did $12 million in their trailing 12 months, right? You know, like, that's just, it's a different business, right? So, I just, they're too small for what I'm working on. They are, I mean, listen, if I can make 7 figures next year selling an info product business, I mean, selling an info product, the things I'm trying to show people to do, I'm saying you're going to make 60 grand. Like, it doesn't make sense. Why, you know, like, so it all like aligns perfectly in terms of why I'm doing this, why it makes sense, and how it can work for people. I just think I've got a really good offer, a really good angle on a sort of old offer, so to speak. And that is like flipping houses. And so that's why I think it'll be the cash cow.
And then so if people want to find it, where do they go? It's just nanoflips.com?
Nanoflips.com. You will never see me try and sell you. Like, I'm not like a hard sales guy. That's actually, I think I can make a lot more money if I, for lack of a better term, poured out my timeline on Twitter, which I really, really try not to do. The idea here is like, I will post threads and post newsletters that I think most people will tell you that they would pay for. And the idea is for all to be free. And then if you're interested in learning more, I'm happy to sell you a course. No complaints there. But yeah, just nanoflips.com. And I actually wanted microflips.com, but it didn't work out. And I like nanoflips better now anyway. So.
And so why don't you kind of like whore out the timeline and try and make more money that way?
So, I mean, they'll reach a point where there's a little bit more pushing of it. But again, because I just see the value of Twitter, like, again, I'm not rich, but I've done well enough in my life that I'm not super, super worried about an extra 5 or 10 grand a month from this. Like, I think that there are people in my life that I think have already would take a step back if they saw how much I tweet, and I don't want it to become like, I'm not knocking the big info product guys. I know a lot of them. They're awesome. Some of them are the best entrepreneurs I know. But like my business, like if for instance, if I ever sold Common Commerce or took it public and I stepped away, maybe I'd go, whole hog, so to speak, on the info product world stuff. But for now, Twitter is more valuable to me for deal flow and networking. And so I don't want it to turn away people because they think I'm just trying to shill them a course, right? We're still in a weird time where courses are like half bullshit. Some of them are total bullshit. You've got great ones, and then some are like just complete and utter fraud, right? And so I'm cognizant of that, and that there are real people in my life that probably think that every course is complete and utter fraud. So even the ones that aren't. And so I don't want to become that guy that's just like, buy from me, buy from me, buy from me. I think there's a lot more value in the, like, if I could get to 500,000 followers on Twitter, like, I just know there's a lot more opportunity than making an extra 500K from course. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And so nanoflips.com is so they want to learn more about website flipping. And then your Twitter is Jameson or James on Camp, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Jameson or James on Camp. But yeah, JAMESONCAMP. And don't worry, I tweet an offensive amount of content, like multiple times a day. So always there.
I'll make sure it's all linked in the show notes down below. I know we're way over time here, so I want to just jump to I have so many more things we could go into, but I'm just going to jump to my last question that I ask everybody at the end of every interview. And so I like to flip the script a little bit. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. So pretend you have a crystal ball. You can ask this crystal ball any question, you'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you'd want to know the answer to?
Whoa. I mean, other than like the really corny, just like, what is the meaning of life? It'd be more about like, what is my purpose? I think that sort of, we all ask this sort of question, like, what's the meaning of life? Like, I'm not sure there's like one singular meaning, but like we started by talking about money not being everything. Like, okay, I get it. I get it. Money's not everything, but what is everything? What would be, if I could figure out a way, if a crystal ball could tell me what was the one way to like feel fulfilled, right? Because like my insane pursuit of capital comes from a place of feeling unfulfilled, right? To be completely candid. If there was something that I could be doing in my life that would make me feel fulfilled, whether I had a penny or $100 million, what would it be? Because I'd be happy to go full on into that, because I don't know what it is exactly yet. Other than I love building stuff. That's all I know for sure for now.
I think that's a great question, because I've been listening to a lot of Tom Bilyeu interviews. He says there's a difference between happiness and fulfillment. Like, you can eat a bowl of ice cream and be happy, but it's like, how do you feel when you're by yourself? Like, what do you think about yourself when you're by yourself? And that's fulfillment. And that's the key. So that's a really good question and a good note to end on. I know we've talked about James on Camp, Nano Flips. Is there anywhere else you want to send people? I want to give you the floor, kind of plug anything else if you have anything else you'd like people to go to.
No, I mean, not really. I'm really pumped on Nano Flips. We're going to be putting out, I think, a couple more like lower ticket front end things, for people that don't have $10,000 minimum to, or $5,000 minimum to flip a website, and $1,000, $2,000 for a program. So I'm really excited for that, and I've partnered with some great people on that to make that happen. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to build out a YouTube here or there, but I don't want to pretend there's anything. I'm gonna pre-plug something that's not out yet. So myself and two cool homies, Colin and Oren, are starting a podcast called Tap Talk. So it's not out there yet, but look out for Tap Talk when it comes out. It's three moderately successful entrepreneurs just talking shit and looking at tabs in their browser, whatever their favorite tab in their browser was. So keep an eye out for that eventually. Taptalk.io will exist soon.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below, and I'll keep an eye out for your podcast to drop, and try to remember to make sure I come back here so I can throw that in the show notes as well for anyone listening to this after the fact. But I want to thank you so much for taking time to be on this podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening, whether you've listened the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone do me a big favor. Go and follow James on Twitter. Go and subscribe to Nano Flips. I've done both already. I highly recommend you do the same as well. Like I said, I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below so you can find it. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me everywhere on social media at Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. As always, today's podcast is powered by TRUFAN. Thank you once again for listening. We'll talk soon.